primary custodial parent, it's important to be consistent and to be frequent and to be steady in your child's life. All of us who grew up without our dads in the home grew up with a sense of there was something missing. No matter how great our moms were, there was something missing. I was not gonna let my son go through that.
If you're gonna be a father, there's just between fathers and daddies. And you have to be there every day for your child. I tell kids when they come into court, you gotta make sure that that child sees you every day.
That is extremely important. Most people that turn to drugs and abuse alcohol end up in jail and in prison. Most people that end up in poverty like that, their fathers were not in their life.
The way that they are raising their son is going to determine what their grandson is going to look like or become. If they would look to that, then we might get more men that are a little more responsible about family and their children.
Fathers are our first teachers and coaches. They're our mentors. They're our role models. They set an example of success and they push us to succeed. Encourage us when we're struggling. They love us even when we disappoint them, and they stand by us when nobody else will. And when fathers are absent, when they abandon the responsibilities to their children, we know the damage that that does to our families.
My name is Daryl McMillan, and I am a single father. I like to say that there are a lot of good single fathers out there. They're often overlooked because of the ones that don't take care of their responsibilities. But you should just, take the time to get to know them.
Hi, my name is Cliff Johnson with Cliff Johnson Insurance Agency out of Indianapolis, Indiana. I was a single father for going on right at 10 years. When my daughter was born, I was a college student, and we conceived her when I came home from break my junior year. And I found out, my sophomore year, and I found out she was pregnant right before I returned to school. And I was going to school in Alabama at the time. And when I found out that we were pregnant, I changed schools, came back to Indiana, went to a small school in southern Indiana, and decided to be closer to my family. It was life-changing because I knew I didn't want to be an absentee father, and I was home during the time of my daughter's birth. I came home during that period, and I knew I had to come home to be closer to my daughter. I wanted to be a father. My father was not in my life growing up, and I wanted to make sure that I was in my daughter's life growing up. So applying to a new college and getting acceptance and knowing that I could be closer to my daughter was very important to me. So it was a life-changing experience and one that I didn't expect. I was a football player, and I was down in Alabama playing football at the time, and I thought, hey, I'm going to play football and have a good time, but life has a way of throwing you curves. So I was happy to have a daughter and definitely wanted to be in her life.
I held, at an early age, relatively speaking, some pretty high positions in the corporate world. In the beginning, the marriage was good. A lot of different life circumstances happened to us. We moved across the country a couple times, from Washington to Ohio, Ohio to LA, and LA to the Bay. Bought and sold a home, had a baby, dealt with other financial pressures here and there, the stress of being a high-powered executive at a young age. And I think that they all took their toll. I think in retrospect, it's not about blame. There are definitely things that both of us could have done better. But I'm not going to sit there and blame her, or I hope she doesn't blame me. At the end of the day, it didn't work out.
I was in a funk for a while. Got sick. I was in the hospital for like 3 days. It was a tough time. I didn't know how I was going to make it through, or if The boys, so at one point I didn't know if they were going to end up being with me or if the courts were going to, let them go with her, and that really would have made things, real bad. I want to just see them happy. There were some happy times. I was happy just having a family, being together. I was happy going out with the family. It turned quick. It turned bad quick.
My experience in court from day one, from her birth, once we established paternity, and I went down and signed up to pay child support. I was a young man. I didn't know the system. I didn't have an attorney or anyone to represent me. So I went down and, of course, established paternity. I just said it was my daughter. There was no DNA or anything like that. I just said yes. And from that point on, I was immediately put on child support, which no problem with that, even though we were staying together. We were living together in the same apartment. So I paid what I was supposed to pay and was still taking care of my daughter. It was a life-changing experience because in my opinion, the woman had, my ex had the upper hand in that she had friends that kind of told her how the system works, and before we knew if we were going to be together or not, I was paying child support even though we were both with physical custody of our daughter.
We want our children to succeed in life. We need fathers to step up. We need fathers to understand that their work doesn't end with conception. What truly makes a man a father is the ability to raise a child and invest in that child. And we need fathers to be involved in their kids' lives, not just when it's easy, not just during the afternoons in the park or at the zoo when it's all fun and games, but when it's hard, when young people are struggling and there aren't any quick fixes or easy answers. And that's when young people need compassion and patience as well as a little bit of tough love.
But once everything fell on me, it's like, okay, the pressure is on you now. There's nobody else to lean on. You can't lean on nobody else. You gotta step up now. And that's just maturity. You just either fight or flight. Fight or flight. Which one? What you gonna do? So I chose to stand up and fight.
There is no quitting. It is not an option. He's counting on you. You got to make it happen for him, and you got to find a way.
Once I became stable and my business was okay, I actually purchased a home. I was 23 years old. And at that point, we made the decision that my daughter would come stay with me. And my daughter was 3 years old at the time because her mother was living in an apartment and maybe going from apartment to apartment. And so with me having the stability, my daughter came to stay with me. Even though she was staying with me, I was still paying child support. Until one day I told the judge that I wanted credit for some money that I had given her above and beyond the child support because she needed additional funds. And I'd cut a check for those, and not given her cash. And I wanted credit for the checks to be applied towards the child support. And at that point, my whole life changed immediately based off the judge's response to me.
There are organizations of men that feel they are massively discriminated against in the court system on custody. You hear a statistic of 80% of the time men lose, and I think that's just plain factually wrong. Men may not get all of the time they were asking for, and they may not get literally 50-50, but that I think the judges really want to try to do as much as they can what's right by the children, and that, as a general proposition, means as much time with dad and as much time with mom as really is feasible under the circumstances. So what was the deciding factor of, especially as to custody decision? The touchstone of all of the child decisions is the best interest of the child, so that it's not a question of father's rights. It's not a question of mother's rights. It's not a question of unfairness to one parent or another. It's a question of what is the best interest of the child. Judges are trained to and want to involve both parents as much as possible. And of course, it's not true that every judge makes every decision correctly, and that there may be individual cases where there was a wrong call.
So the judge responded to me by writing an attorney's name down on a piece of paper. He passed it across the bench, And he told me that if I were to appear in his court again, if I did not have custody of my daughter, he was going to lock me up. And he explained why. He asked me several questions. He said, "Who does your daughter live with?" I said, "She lives with me." He said, "Who puts her on the school bus in the morning?" I said, "Well, I take her to school." "Who does her hair?" I said, "Well, my girlfriend or one of the stylists in my shop will do her hair." "Who feeds her? Who pays for her food? Who pays for her clothes?" I answered in the affirmative that I did all of that. And he looked at my ex and asked her, "You do not want to give him credit for these money above and beyond the child support?" And she said no. After the judge told me to seek legal custody was horrible. In fact, we left the court. My daughter's 5 years old. The mother had never been to her school at all. And on that day, she went to the school and she took my daughter out of school. She actually kidnapped her. So I didn't see my daughter again until she was 6 years old. Yeah, it's kind of emotional right there. She had my daughter for a year. It's sad because the community at that point thinks the mother is in the right. They think the mother is right and the dad is automatically wrong. And it's hard to explain that a father wants to be in a child's life and is willing to do the things that what we think a mother should do. She had been dating the father of her second child a while, and I guess he started to see some of the things that I had told him about why we broke up. And so on Christmas Eve, he called me and asked me if I would like to see my daughter. And sorry. And I told him, absolutely, you know where she's at. So I got to see my daughter on Christmas Eve of her six-year life. My daughter's mother, she would go from shelter to shelter, and I was letting the attorney know with the investigator, and she ended up getting sick. And she went to the hospital, and she called me from the hospital and told me to come get my daughter.
The type of men they become is largely due to the examples that they've seen, not just from their fathers, but the men that are in their lives as a young boy, and what the type of men they grow into.
I am Lars Rasko. I'm the co-founder of the Boys to Men Mentoring Program in Indianapolis, Indiana. Our program has been running for 25 years, and we've worked with over 3,000 young boys. The challenge is that they don't have someone that spends time with them. The relationships are not built where they understand the purpose for their future life, the passions and the dreams that they have for themselves. So the activities that we do is try to build those relationships with the young men so they can trust us, and then we expose them to things that help them find their passion. The percentage of young men that come through our program generally averages about 65 to 75%. And that is consistent with the national norm. You know, when you look at single parent moms, that they're looking for programs for their young males.
Hello, my name is Daphenia Mayhew. I'm 39 years old, mother of two boys, ages 14 and 12, and I'm originally from Orlando, Florida. How did I hear about Boys to Men? I've heard about it through my aunt. She's like my aunt to me since I've been here, and she told me about it, and she said it would be really good for them. So I went online, researched it, and signed them up for it. So, and they've been in it ever since, and they love it. Psychologically, what happens to young men with their fathers not being there, they look to other avenues for someone to take care of them, to be a father figure to them. Like some young men join gangs to have that gang closeness, like, hey, the gang raised me. Even though I got a mother, but my dad wasn't around, so I looked to my gang men, gang friends as my fathers. I didn't have my father, really. So It was important to me when I had Elijah that he be there. And then Jaden came along. I wanted him to be there. But he was there, but as soon as we divorced and went apart, it's like he backed away. But then I still pressed it like, hey, you need to be involved in their life. It's important that you be involved in their life.
What the community needs is for more men to take responsibility, not just for their own sons, but for the boys that are in the community, and help them find that purpose, help them to believe in themselves, help them to understand that there really aren't any bad issues or mistakes. Everything is designed to build character. And when young people start to understand they're building their character, then failure is not final. They can always grow from their mistakes. But a lot of times, because they don't have men that are trying to help develop them, they run into this issue of, I don't even want to try because I'm going to fail and then I'm going to just not make it. So it's better for me to just do nothing and live in the community, not adding to the success of the community, and then generally either going into struggles or they go into jail.
Some of the issues that they face is not having a close relationship with their dad. Right now, they talk to him every now and then, but they don't have that close bond like boys should have with their fathers. I can't teach them how to be men or certain things that a man can do. So it's very important that boys have relationships with their fathers.
Our young men need to be led. We need fathers to stay in the house. I can't begin to tell you how many young men I see on a daily basis that are basically crying out for attention, crying out for the strong hand of a man to teach them how to be a man. I have a number of mentoring programs that I require kids to participate in as a function of their probation. Mentoring does great work. It's the program du jour. It's the one that really, really works most often because it speaks at the core of what the problem is, the missing man.
Boys to Men is a great way to learn how to become a man. They teach you so many life skills that are so important. Sometimes we'll spend an hour just learning how to tie ties. All the mentors have great fatherly skills.
It's like a father, quote unquote, like a father that you never had. Because the mentors, they're teaching you these things, and then it's you can go to them and talk about anything. Because I still talk to my dad, but then it's some stuff I try to keep away from it. I can take it to the mentors and talk to them.
So same thing he said, I didn't grow up with my parents since me.
Wow.
So I'm able to talk to my family and the mentors about certain things I don't want to tell my mom sometimes.
If my dad was here, I would tell him everything that happened in the chat, more than I would tell my mom, because I feel like he would understand me.
Okay.
And same here.
Okay.
Or talk about that, how it is to feel to actually drive a car, rent a go-kart, and how fun it was and stuff.
If you could ask your dad one question, what would your question be?
Why aren't you here for me now?
Repeat it again.
Why aren't you here for me now, all the time?
Why wasn't you in my life since birth?
Awesome. Why did you have to grow up and think about their family?
Kids that I see over and over and over and over, single parent, 99%. I don't see that child that comes from biological mother, biological father, married to each other in the same home. No, I can count the number of kids that come from that home. It doesn't happen. Or let me, it happens one time. They do not become repeat offenders. Everybody's entitled to a mistake. But the kid that I see over and over and over and over, single parent. Now, there's a subsection of that as well. There are kids that I see where parents are divorced and have remarried I get, so it's not just dads in the house. Biological dad in the house keeps that kid from being involved in the system. It's not just a dad, but biological dad. And something about the biology that really controls and provides the kind of structure that keeps a child from venturing too far from the fold, home training and the like. But 99% of my caseload, and everybody's caseload that's in the youth justice system, is made up of single parent homes.
My name is Kareem Hines. My organization is called New Boy, which is an acronym for New Breed of Youth Mentoring and Youth Development Program. I was born in Harlem, New York, born in '74, so I kind of grew up within that crack epidemic when crack had its first wave in Harlem. So my father suffered from that. I was raised by a single father, which is kind of not the normal route. My mother wasn't really involved in my life, so my father raised me and my sister, a couple of brothers. But he started me off in karate at the age of 6. So he kind of knew that I needed a balance from what my normal environment was about to expose me to. And when he exposed me to karate, it was at the Harlem YMCA, right across the street from my house. So maybe 100 feet from my front door, I always had a safe haven from what the norm was. My experience being raised from my father was empowering. It definitely was life-shaping. At the time, I was in the moment. My dad was raising me, it was kind of the normal thing. But a lot of my friends in my neighborhood didn't have dads. So not only was he my dad, he was everyone else's dad. So he kind of held me to a higher standard, than a lot of my friends. I couldn't do a lot of things in the neighborhood that I wanted to do with my friends because everybody knew I had a dad. And then he surrounded me with other dads. And that's one thing that I praise him for today, is that he surrounded me with a village. He wasn't selfish from a standpoint of I can raise my son, I can do it on my own. He surrounded me with a village, karate instructors, mentors, so who all had a piece of me, all had a piece of my upbringing. I won a Harlem YMCA Black Achievers in Industry Youth of the Year Award. And out of all the YMCAs in New York City, they pick one youth to be Youth of the Year who actually gets a chance to sit on the dais and make a speech about how they became Youth of the Year and what the YMCA has done for them. And I was fortunate enough to be the recipient in 1990. What made me move from Harlem, New York to Indianapolis? Great question. My mentor. I had a mentor that I met at the Harlem YMCA. Of course, I mentioned I did have a dad who was my first mentor. But sometimes I think young men can kind of cut their dads off. They kind of mute their dad's voices after a while, kind of take their dads for granted. Again, he surrounded me with a mentor, and I met my mentor at the Harlem YMCA. He kind of raised me in the YMCA when I couldn't go to my dad, or I felt like I couldn't go to my dad, I could go to my mentor. And my mentor was, he was my saving grace. He was the reason I got my first job at the YMCA. When I was 19, he called me because he came to Indianapolis, Indiana, and he said, would you like to come out, leave New York and come to Indianapolis, Indiana to work for me as a day camp counselor at the YMCA? First I said no, I wasn't leaving Harlem to come to Indiana. But I made some mistakes in my life. I had messed up some opportunities, burned some bridges. I just became an adult. So my father talked to me and said, you need to go. And I went, and I came, and I used to live at the Fall Creek YMCA on 10th Street with my mentor. Well, I was at the Fall Creek YMCA and was the aquatic director, and I met a gentleman named Lars Rasko. And I used to teach his kids how to swim. I also taught them martial arts. So our relationship developed for about a year, and then he told me he had a mentoring program. And around that time, my sons were getting a little bit older, and I wanted to involve them in a mentoring program. I wanted to do for them what my dad did for me. I needed to surround them with some other black men, role models, who could augment and supplement the message that I was giving them. And I met Dr. Lars Rasko. He had a program called Boys to Men. And was just intrigued by the program, intrigued about the group mentality of the program. Because that's one thing about mentoring. One-to-one mentoring is great, but when you can get the young men in a group and they can learn from each other, as long as it's facilitated by the right men, they start to glean from each other. And I think that's where the magic comes. That's where the magic comes in, because then you have peer mentors. So I was intrigued by that, and I was able to bring my sons in it, and I was also able to become an adult mentor myself. In Boys to Men, we worked with a lot of young men who, some of them came from single parent backgrounds, some of them had mom and dad at home. Those young men needed mentors too. As I started to evolve in Boys to Men, I started meeting other young men who did not have those stable backgrounds, young men who were involved in the juvenile justice system. Those young men talk a different language than young men who are coming up in stable homes. These young men that are tied to the streets, it's a totally different language. And I wanted to give them their own voice. And that's when I separated and I started New Boy. And I started primarily working with young men involved in the juvenile justice system, because that's where I came from. You know, although I wasn't heavily involved in the juvenile justice system, me coming up in Harlem, New York, the things that I had come up around, you know, I was selling drugs, I saw death and violence every day, and I knew what a mentor, a strong man in my life did to divert me from going that route, and I wanted to be that same man for those young men.
One particular year, it's maybe 5 years in, we had about 20 fathers show up, or 20 males show up, and within the third week, they were all gone. So it was these 4 teachers and all these men, and then all the men left. And they had a lot to do with, you know, they've got responsibilities with work and home and all that. So we got it. But it was only those men that had sons in the program that stayed. How do we get more fathers to be active? I believe we first need to change the whole narrative in America. Because number one, men don't talk. And so all of our men are in these silos, living their own lives. And we need to, secondly, change this narrative of what success means. Success is not the big house, the big car, the trophy wife, all this kind of thing. It's more about deciding as a young person the type of lifestyle that you want to live, and then focusing on that lifestyle. And so in order to do that, when you have children, your focus has to be on the children. And a lot of times for men in America, our focus is on the stuff. I've seen a lot of fathers who have become successful now with their boys have finally understood that they were wrong, and they acknowledged that to their sons. That they understand that they broke the promise. Because I've read some material, I don't have the full knowledge yet, but I've read some material that boys, baby boys, build trust, and it comes directly from father up to age 2. So if the father's not there, this young man's gonna spend a long time trying to build that trust relationship. And so if fathers are not in the life, then they've got to apologize, they've got to be sincere, and really work to build that relationship. And then they have to wait for the son to accept it.
My name is Anthony Beverly. I'm with Stop the Violence Indianapolis, born and raised here in Indianapolis. I got custody of my first son when he was in the 2nd grade. And his mother and I had talked. She was having some issues. I would go down to Florida and visit because we lived in 2 different states. And then all of a sudden she disappeared. And luckily I had stayed in contact with the auntie, and she kind of kept me in the loop on what was going on. And then she totally disappeared. The auntie didn't even have contact with her. But I kept searching for my son because that was my first son. I can't speak for her, but I felt like she took it as a threat that I was trying to take our son away from her. But that wasn't the case. And so she totally cut off communication with me, but I stayed in contact with the aunt. Fast forward, it was time for him to start school. And when he started school, in Florida, you have to do physicals and those kind of things. And so the doctor felt something wasn't right. He didn't know exactly what. He reported the case, and it ended up going into Child Department Services. And she had told him that he didn't have a father. The case manager called me and asked me if I would be interested in getting custody of my son. I said, definitely. You know, it's what I've been wanting as my son, you know? And because I was taught by my father to be responsible. I had a father that poured that into me. Even though he left my home when I was in the 9th grade. But he always talked about being a responsible man, being a responsible person, being a responsible father. And so that stuck with me. How did I obtain custody of my second son? We were living in Nashville, Tennessee. I was going to school full-time, working 2 part-time jobs and a full-time job. My youngest son, which is, they're 7 years apart, began to have issues in school. And his mother had married. There were some things that went down between the father and my son. And so, I mean, I was already getting him every other weekend anyway. And so I talked to her about letting him come move in with me. And again, I believe she felt like I'm trying to take her son from her. So that started a struggle. In the beginning, we had a really good relationship, even though she was married. And we co-parent very well together. But whenever that situation went down with her and her husband and my son, again, there was a Child Protective Services that got involved with that piece. So we were in the hospital, and I saw my son land on a table with the whips on his legs. And of course I was enraged. But at the same time, I was trying to understand where this husband was coming from, dealing with somebody else's son. And so the mother and I had talked at the hospital. And it was nothing but the Spirit of the Lord that spoke to me and said, Satan is trying to tear down families. And even though I wanted custody of my son, and those thoughts were going in one side of my mind, this is an opportunity to use that to get custody. But then on the other side, from a spiritual side, it was, you got to do the right thing. By the time I finished that thought, the case manager walks in the room with me and his mother, and she starts bad-mouthing her husband and tearing him down. Me being a black man, working with all of these other families, seeing that so often, the Spirit of the Lord said, speak up. And I spoke and I said, I want the husband to go through management, some kind of counseling, and then I want to be a part of that counseling. Because even though this happened, I understand that they just got married, they just bought 2 new cars, they just bought a house, and my son was in the house wreaking havoc. But what I don't want is my son to be back into that house. I want him to be with me. And so the case manager agreed. And she made it easy for me to, for us to get joint custody. But he lived with me, and I was the lead parent. What was it like raising 2 boys as a single father and in school and college? It was, I mean, you know, life in and of itself for a black person, a black man, you know, is already tough. But there was a drive that I had to save my boys. I had to. Nothing else mattered. Everything else was put to the side. I laid down my life for theirs, and I thought that was the right thing to do. Even though I had no parenting experience, I had no guidance, there was no book. I just did what I thought was right. And what was right was for them to be with me because they were my seed.
The notion of the broken home is real. But I also think that sometimes we put too much on it. you know? And I think it really comes down to is, what it really comes down to is, what's the definition of a broken home? You know? A broken home, you know, to me, it's a term that's slapped on things too easily. I mean, I grew up in a home where my mother raised us. The home wasn't broken. The home was a home where my parents were divorced. My father wasn't there. He left.
My father, he's old school. He don't do a lot of talking. He didn't give no advice at all. None. Not a little bit.
Some of you know the statistics. Children who grow up without fathers are more likely to drop out of school and wind up in prison. They're more likely to have substance abuse problems, run away from home, and become teenage parents themselves.
Most important thing is, whether you fight or whether you don't, whatever your reasons are or what they are not, the most important thing is, regardless of that, is to be consistent, to be a constant factor and a productive force in your child's rearing.
Mont Craig, I'm a law enforcement officer. In 1986, she was born, and I got custody of her in April. She was born in December. I got custody of April in 1987. How was that for me?
Yes.
It was a responsibility I had to take. My parents taught me to be responsible, so when I had to tell them, and that was the situation, and I had to man up. My experience in court was they weren't used to a male in court that was seeking custody of their child. They thought, most males are, of my hue, don't really care about their kids. But I had to realize that the prosecutor's office was representing me due to situations as to why I was seeking custody of my own child. I grew up with two parents, mother and father, and never had any children. This was my firstborn, and I wanted them to have the same advantages that I did, which was to have a mother and father, but that didn't happen. So there were situations that happened in Mom's life, and I had to take up the slack and do what I needed to do.
I have a good support system around me, friends, family, those close to me, et cetera, et cetera. And all that said, without that support system and without those people around, you can easily find yourself in a situation, because it becomes overwhelming. But I'm willing to take on that responsibility, because I know at the end of the day, children are the biggest gift that God can give you in terms of raising them. And if you're not in a position to raise them the way they need to be raised, and you're not in a position to raise them right, you don't need to take on that responsibility at all.
I got my support from my mother and father. My mother told me, this is your responsibility. I don't care what you want to do, how you want to do it. You can go to work, but when you come home, you can't go anywhere and do anything until you've done everything about her needs. And if it's not work related, you cannot go out until she can stay asleep all night. The hardest experience being a young age was the responsibility. I mean, this child had to be fed, diapers had to be changed, and you have, and she's a female, so have to learn to do her hair and do all these things. When I had free time and I was able to ride around and go somewhere and go see my boys, well, she had to go with me, because my mother was not gonna babysit. She drilled that in my head. There's two things. I don't babysit. This is your child. She said, I'll watch her, but I don't babysit. I didn't understand that for some years. Watching her is when she wanted to do it, and babysitting is when I wanted her to do it. Did I ever feel like giving up? No. No. She meant that much to me that I brought you into this world, and it's my job. I have to take care of you. I have to show you how life is and what there is in life. to bring her up, to teach her, and still to this day, show her the ways that life is easy, you only make it hard. And there's nothing in this world that's free. You have to work for everything that you want, everything that you get. So, no. I think it made me actually a better father, a better man, because of having to watch her grow.
The worst thing I've ever experienced, I think, was watching a mother yell at her daughter and tell her daughter how much she hated her. You know, that struck me to the core, because what I realized was the mother wasn't saying she wasn't really saying, I hate you. Mother was saying, I hate me, because the father wasn't in that child's life. That child needed a father. That mother needed the assistance of that child's father to properly raise that child. But mother was a teenage mother. Mother wasn't ready to be a mother, but she had to be. She wasn't finished growing up herself, so other family members raised her daughter. And her daughter grew up wild, without structure. And now the daughter would not listen, nor would she respect her mother. And they were like battling tops the entire time. And mother was pressurized because the daughter was in and out of the system, running away from home, truant from school, not doing work, hanging out with boys and older men on the internet, selling herself and doing all of these things. And mother had no control. Mother didn't know what to do, and she was not equipped herself to really handle this. And they were at it all the time, and just pressure in court. Because what happens is when you were in court, the system, we try to empower parents to help them with their child. But we don't want to be I don't want to be a co-parent, but I want to give you the skills and the resources necessary to help yourself and your child. But the problem is, as I said before, if you haven't been there for the first 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years, you can't all of a sudden just, change horses midstream. But they have been going at it. They have been individual counseling, family counseling. But mother was just fed up, and she just yelled it out, I hate you. And then they both burst in tears, and they turned, and I'll never forget that. I mean, I will just never forget that, because after she says that, the courtroom is silent. Because, what do you say? And so I let that moment hang, because I was kind of stunned myself. I've seen a lot of things, but that was probably the most hurtful statement I have ever heard a parent say to a child.
I'm not gonna point the finger and go, well, if dads don't reach out to their child, it's their fault. Because if you just point finger at people, at fathers, society, the fathers become defensive and go, well, I'm doing the best I can. No, I understand you're doing the best you can. There's no fault in this, but it needs to get better.
Kids are having babies now. So much information out there, so many different organizations. Why do we as men not take advantage of the information that's out there?
African American men are the hardest group to get into therapy. They're the hardest group to get they're the hardest group to get into the doctor for prostate cancer. They're the hardest group to get screened for anything. And so if you're dealing with a group that is taught to be tough and strong and not ask for help, I can do this on my own. Who do you run to when you have a problem? Your boys. And your boys can handle it.
My name is Pastor Freddie Banks. I am a pastor of a Bethel AME Church, Richmond, Indiana. I've been in the ministry some 42 years, both as a pastor in the Baptist denomination as well as African Methodist Episcopal denomination. I've been blessed to celebrate recently 42 years total in the ministry. I just love doing ministry, but I believe God orchestrates our steps. So I was just led to look at psychology, because I do understand there's an intricate mix in a person's cognitive way of thinking and their religious perspective as well. So I started off that way, and I've loved the connection of ministry and psychology as well. I chose youth because I believe I have a unique calling in communicating with youth. One of the problems with youth is they act out what they're trying to say verbally. So again, with youth, they're really physically or aggressively acting out what they can't mentally conceptualize enough to verbally say. How much is trauma affecting youth in their daily lives? Here's how I believe trauma has just an overwhelming respect to how kids either fail or succeed. Number one, I believe youth are dealing with trauma differently than different generations of people. Here's what I know to be true. They deal with trauma differently because they hold that trauma inside instead of sharing the trauma with others. And any professional knows that trauma that isn't dealt with effectively really becomes overwhelming trauma. And I think that's another reason why suicide rate among young people is extremely high, because they have no coping mechanisms on their own, and they're not willing to share with other adults that can alleviate and help process that trauma. You want to set up goals to offset the problems. And this is very important when you talk about goal setting. You always want to start with obtainable, measurable goals. You want to start with goals that they can achieve, or i.e., short-term goals leading to the ultimate or long-term goal. Because once a young person sees that they have success or have accomplished anything, it triggers things in their mind to always want to do that, accomplish something. The fact of the matter is, kids have always heard, "Oh, you're so terrible. You're so bad. You just don't listen." You know, whatever the complaint is, they're used to hearing that. However, they're not used to hearing, "Good job. You used to use profanity every day of the week, but now, because of your smaller goals, I've only heard you use it 5 days a week." And you have to give them that same equal attention as far as giving them praise for however minute the accomplishment is. They need that in order to build up some momentum in that area.
I'm an engineer, construction management and engineer, working with a nationally known engineering firm. I've been doing engineering since I was a sophomore. Well, I can go further back than that. I've been involved in some type of engineering, construction, electrical since I was about 8-10 years of age. I enjoyed music, so I've been involved in that as well since about the age of 8. Growing up was kind of hard. My parents divorced when I was young. My mother and father always argued a lot. I ended up at the age of 7, 8 years of age with bleeding stomach ulcers because I used to hear them arguing all the time. And I got aggravated by hearing them argue a lot because my room was right next door to theirs. My mother was a mother bear. She was very protective of her kids. And one day she just called it quits and just moved right on out. I mean, when I say moved out, she just like let him think that she was going to work, and she had movers coming in. And as soon as he went to work, she had movers at the house, and she just bailed out, moved us out. It was sad that, and it's still sad to this day, that my father doesn't put in the time with us. He has never seen us graduate from any type of schooling. So I learned that lesson. I mean, you kind of learn from your parents in the good and the bad. You take certain things that they instilled in you. Sometimes you don't. You see certain things that they do, and then you work it to your best advantage. By the time I got to an age where I know I want to settle down and have kids, I know I wasn't going to be like my father. I kind of started late with kids. I'm 56 and my son is 4. I wanted to get this right. So even though my son's mother and I are somewhat hostile to each other, we don't get along. And it's a big story behind that. How it changed me is that everything is about my son. Well, and to any parent, it should be your children first. Whatever you have to do to make them comfortable, to make them successful, to provide for them, that's one of the things that you do. That's what a parent does. He needs his father. He needs his father. He needs his father. He needs to know what values I can instill into him.
I think to me it is, I think one of the things, it was a life lesson for me, going through a custody battle and not knowing what the outcome would be. It was tough. I wasn't prepared. I think that's just one aspect of it. The other thing is I grew up with my father not being around. He was there, I think, for the first 10 or 11 years of my life. And after that, it was hit or miss. And what I mean by hit or miss is he would come 1 week and 2 weeks, I don't see him anymore. And so for me, I think one of the things that I said, if I ever had a kid, that I was going to do everything in my power to make sure that I was a part of his life. And so for me, that's why it's so important. But the other thing is, I think a lot of times as men, we don't tell our stories because how we're going to be judged by our circle of male friends, or just judged, period. There were so many key figures. Like there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. George Logan, who was an intricate part of that. And then there was Berto Elmore, who was a criminal defense attorney out in Philadelphia, who will come and pick us up at a young age and just expose us to different things. So, but I say that these were men of integrity and they held a high regard for me. So I think that's a real big part of it. And I think a lot of it is just, my mom was a praying mother. She was always, God gonna do this, you do this, God will do that. So that's been the foundation for me, So if that answers a question, so those were the guys that I looked at or tried to emulate because I saw what they did with their kids. And like I said, I'm not saying that my father was a bad guy. I think he just didn't know how to be a father. You know, I think that's one of the things that, you know, sometimes men, we don't have nothing to go by, a model to go by. But in my case, I had 3 or 4, you know, and I would just look, and like I said, that was it, man. I really didn't have a whole lot to look at or what to look for. I just knew I just didn't want to be like my dad. Okay, I'm over here tearing up, and I think the biggest thing is abandonment. And funny thing is, it just hit like a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago in my car, and I'm driving, and I'm like, what the hell? It's like I'm suffering from abandonment and didn't realize that's what it was. You know, I think as a kid, nobody wants to be abandoned or feel like they're abandoned, but it hit. I mean, even talking to you right now about this, it hurts. It hurts. You know. It hurts. Here I am, some 40, almost 50, 40 years later. Like I said, I'm dealing with abandonment, and like I'm sitting here now crying a little bit because of the impact. I think it was so important because for me, I didn't know how to do anything else but to fight. You know, my son was too young to voice his opinion. So I had to fight on his behalf, you know, and mine. Because a lot of times when I was going through the court, you know, in court, I would sit and look at these other men, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I did not want to be the typical, I ain't gonna say the typical, I just didn't want to be a statistic. It's too many times we quit our jobs, we quit our profession, we quit a lot, we quit this, we quit that. But you can't quit on your kid because you only get one shot at raising it. And you got to do it the right way. And when I went through it, I thought I had to just show up. And it's more than just showing up. You got to come in with your I's dotted and your T's crossed when you go into court. And it's best if you get representation. Because a lot of times, if you don't understand the language, which is another issue in a courtroom, if you don't understand the language and you're not well versed in that area, then quite naturally you would want to quit. And so for me, I just wanted, like I told my son's mom, listen, I wasn't good with you doing this, I wasn't good with you doing that, but don't deny me the opportunity to be an awesome dad. It's so important. It gives you insight to what men go through. Second thing is, it gives men a sense of, it validates men. Because a lot of times we don't get validation. We're supposed to go without it, and more so than ever, it gives men a voice. A lot of times, we don't want to talk. For whatever their reason is, we just don't want to talk about whatever it is that we go through. And at the end of the day, you're a human being.
I am Steve Scoop Jefferson, Emmy Award-winning journalist for 13 News in Indianapolis, Indiana, NBC affiliate. The best thing about being a reporter is meeting new people every day who rely on you to share their story with the community and with the world. Everybody has a story to tell. And for someone to put their trust in you to tell their story is one of the most rewarding parts of the job. I'm a crime reporter. I meet people on the worst days of their life. They've either had to call the police, they need the police, they've either been a victim, and in some cases, they're a suspect. But yet and still, they have a story to tell. And they're looking for you to tell their story as accurately as possible. and they want people to know about their story, either because they don't want what happened to them to happen to somebody else, or they're seeking justice and they need your help to get to that justice. I went into journalism because of where I grew up and how I grew up and the people in my family. To explain that, I grew up in the projects of Dayton, Ohio, which was plagued by crime even back then. I had older family members who were criminals, in and out of jail. And I wanted to make a difference. I grew up watching Ed Bradley on the CBS Evening News, who's from Dayton, Ohio. And I admired him so much because I felt like we were from the same city. And I thought if Ed Bradley can become a journalist and help tell stories and change lives, I could do that too. So when I told my family, my friends, my classmates that I wanted to be on TV and tell stories, they said, "Oh, you're gonna be on TV, all right, just like the rest of us in handcuffs." So I made it basically my life's journey to become a journalist, to tell those stories.
I'm Jeffrey A. Johnson, Sr. I'm the senior pastor of the Eastern Star Church of Indianapolis and Fishers, Indiana. Some of the most important lessons I've learned as a father, to have as much love in that home as possible, because once they get outside that home, man, they run into anything and everything. So just to have unconditional love, that no matter what's happening in their life, what's going on with their thinking, what mistakes that they've made, to just love them unconditionally. That's a lesson that I think has been significant for me, is to make sure that they know that I love them, not because of what they do, but simply because they're my sons. And regardless of what they do or don't do, that's going to be there. As a pastor of the church, what are some of the most challenging issues that I see black men in America facing? One has to be systemic racism. And everywhere you go, everywhere you turn, to be prejudged because of the color of your skin, to always be seen as a threat, whether you walk in a store, drive down a street, run into a police officer, try to go get a job, try to start a company, try to get financing for your house. Everywhere you go, that you run into this systemic, deeply rooted racism. And by now we've all heard that racism is the original sin of the United States.
Every city that I've worked in newsrooms all across the country. And one of the first campaigns when I get to a new newsroom is to make sure that blacks are portrayed the right way. I'll give you a prime example. In every city that I've worked in, the newsroom had a habit of describing the suspects as 5'10", 200 pounds with an afro. And at one point, that was me. That's not a description. And I had to campaign to get that removed out of the newscast because it gave a stereotype to the community that people that fit that description are all criminals. And that's not the case. The media has a huge influence on how blacks are portrayed in the media, but blacks also have a responsibility to make sure that portrayal is correct and that the narrative can be changed as well, because there's more positive things happening in the black community than negative. But you would know that watching the news. And as a black journalist, part of my responsibility is to make sure that that portrayal and that narrative is changed on the newscasts.
Historically in the United States of America, black has been looked at as negative. from encyclopedias, in dictionaries. When I was a kid watching the movies, the bad guys would have on the black hats and the good guys would wear the white hats. And so it's, from devil's food cake being dark and angel food cake being white. So, from the time America started, the images of black has always been negative. And so we still see that today.
I think the biggest issue in the black community that our young men face is hopelessness. A lot of them don't get a chance to get outside their immediate surroundings, their environment, and they don't know that there's a whole nother world outside of where they live. Because I grew up like that. I didn't know that there was something beyond the projects. The last building to the west, the last building to the right, the last building to the north, the last building to the south. That was my world. I never got outside of that until I started going to college. When I was growing up, I was afraid to finish high school and I was afraid to go to college because I never had a big brother or anyone in my family do that. And I ended up at least with a mentor to help me and guide me along the way. And I promised myself that for the rest of my life, if I could help somebody that was in my shoes find their way, that I would do that. I do a lot of mentoring, from 7th to high school to college. And in many cases, a lot of young black men don't believe in their own dream until somebody else believes in their dream and can wake them up to the reality that, oh, you can make your dream come true. I'm part of 100 Black Men of Indianapolis, and our slogan is, what they see is what they'll be. We purposely gather junior and senior high school black males, and we bring in other black males from the community. We bring in attorneys, judges, CPAs, doctors, engineers, so they could see what they can become. That gives them hope, that gives them dreams, that helps them plan their future. And if we can expose young black men to positive black men, it could change their future.
I think we change it through preaching, through teaching, through scripture, to what does the scripture say about us in terms of our humanity. I think we change it in even what you guys are doing now. We tell our own story. Stop letting other people tell our story. We got so many creative people now, black, behind the cameras and doing the directing and owning the companies. And so that's some of the ways that that we can change that. We got black people getting in positions of power and influence, and being able to take that power and influence and not just use it all on yourself, but use it to help shape mentalities about how positive black people are, and just being able to pass that on from generation to generation. And I think exposure, teaching it, talking about it, and addressing it, not ignoring it. And then we'll have that's how I was able to deal with it. Somebody helped me to see it, and then somebody helped me to deal with it, and then somebody helped me to overcome it. And so just being able to pass that on to generations coming behind us. And I do need to say this too, because my mother always exposed us to positive men, because I didn't want to grow up and be a great man like my mother. So, I had to have a model of manhood. So I got that at church, from the men in the church and leaders in the church. And I've always loved church, so even as a kid. And I got that from my coaches in sports and basketball and track and football. Got that from the neighbor down the street. Every time he put his son in sports, as a youngster, he put me in there with him. And I saw in that household, a two-parent household, and what that looks like. And so my mother always made sure she exposed us to positive men to know what real manhood looks like.
My name is Rod Reed. I'm the co-founder and CEO of NXG Youth Motorsports, Inc. We came up with this major thing that was a changer for us. So we were at Pizza Hut on Lafayette Road. We had just gone to Stefan Johansson's go-kart track, and we were eating. And I said, you know what? We should never have another black boy or girl go through the mess we went through. We're going to make sure that the next generation of black racers don't have to deal with this. And that was when the idea was born of Next Gen Racers. That we said we would do a program that we would help bring kids into motorsports and teach them and try to make sure they don't have to deal with the mess by us being able to educate them. And that's how we started. It wasn't too difficult to get the kids involved. It was much more difficult to get their parents to say, hey, yeah, I'm gonna let, Jalen do this. And so we realized that we had to spend a great deal of time educating parents, convincing them that it was safe, making sure that they understood that we were gonna be right there with their child, that this wasn't just they get in the go-kart and they can go as fast as they want and we just leave them alone. That we have a program that's educational, that we teach them each step of the way. What I would say to black fathers and black men as a whole, we have a responsibility to uplift our communities, to make our communities better. And that sounds really cliche, but I'm talking about on a very individual level. Our behavior, what we do with our kids, starting with the children at home, whether we're with their mom or not, we have a responsibility to make sure that that young man or that young woman becomes an adult, a successful adult. I'll just leave you with this one story. There was a young man, and this young man is very successful that I know. I mean, he's financially successful, great career, very well educated. He would drop his son off, and when we would have a performance, his son would be looking for him to see if he's in the crowd, and he wasn't there. And when I had a conversation with him and said, you know what, I know you dropped your son off, I know you've taken care of him and his schooling, he goes to private school, but he's disappointed that his dad wasn't here when these other dads were. So, be responsible. Make sure that you are actually in your child's life, not just taking care of them by providing clothing and food. Be in your child's life.
You have every opportunity in the world to restart your career. You have the opportunity to make more money again. You have the opportunity to do this, to do that. You got one shot to raise your kids, one. And you got one shot to get it right. The most important thing is whether you fight or whether you don't, whatever your reasons are or what they are not, the most important thing is, regardless of that, is to be consistent, to be a constant factor and a productive force in your child's rearing. And if you're not, again, you're not putting that child first.